I have a different take. I'd take the money and put it in the bank, and I would go start flipping houses. I'd use hard money as much as I could so that I was able to keep my capital under wraps, and that would teach me a lot of things. Number one, how to buy property. 2, how to fix it up. 3, how to sell it. And in starting that kind of a buying program, you will run across houses that when you do the numbers, all of a sudden you realize this house shouldn't be flipped and sold, it should be put in your rental inventory. And one of those ways you're going to be able to do that with almost no money out of pocket is something called subject to. How many people here do not know what subject to is? Subject to is buying a property and having the seller keep his mortgage on the property. You're not paying it off. You start making the payments, but his or her name or their name is on the mortgage, but the deed, the ownership of the property, goes in your name. I've bought probably at least 25 houses subject to, and that's hardly any money out of pocket. The only money out of pocket was whatever little fix-up I had to do to the house in order to make it rentable. So I'm a belt and suspenders guy, so I would keep the money in my bank account and find a way to get started without using that $100 grand.
Yes, ma'am. Question?
What is the benefit to the seller for doing that kind of thing?
Normally that type of seller is, the question was, what is the benefit to the seller of doing that? Typically, they're in a situation where they have to unload the monthly payment. Death, divorce, job transfer, job loss, as many things as, Steve mentioned foreclosure. Many of them were foreclosures that I bought, or actually pre-foreclosure. And you save them from having a foreclosure on their credit record. And all they want to do is unburden themselves of that monthly payment. That's the motivation for the seller.
So, again, it's interesting. I would have a different take. Yeah.
I'm not saying you shouldn't flip. I mean, you could do that too, right?
So, today, flipping is actually very, very difficult, especially if you're brand new. Finding that flippable deal with the right numbers that's profitable, it's easier today to find rentals that cash flow. I'm willing to assume that this person has an ongoing source of income, that it isn't just they don't have a job and they have this $50,000.
Yeah.
That they're in the middle of their life, that they've still got another 10, 15, 20 years of working. They want to get started in building their passive income. For that situation, I would take that $50,000. 25 is in the right range for down payment on a $90,000 to $120,000 rental. I would, and you won't find them back to back. It'll take you 6 months between those rentals. So minor fix up on one, find another minor fix up. Now you've deployed your 50. You've got 2 rentals. But now they're throwing off positive cash flow. Don't go on a vacation with it or buy a nice car. At the same time, you've reduced your expenses. Part of achieving financial independence or financial freedom includes cutting the cable bill. If you've got an expensive lease car, trade it in for a car that you own wholly. You start putting your free cash flow into the bank, and whether it's another rental every 2 years or another rental every year or another rental every 3 years, you slowly grow your rental portfolio. And I would deploy the entire nest egg on rentals, but I would refocus my entire lifestyle and have the family behind it. The chart that helps convince the family and your partner is the financial freedom chart. Your expenses trend down slightly, but your income grows as you buy more rentals. At some point, what happens when your passive income exceeds your expenses? What is that date called? Anyone? Financial freedom date. That is the date, plus 1 day, you can have your Johnny paycheck. Take this job and I'm going to leave.
Is that the way the song goes?
That chart of growing passive income happens by you buying those 2 first rentals and then starting to save for the next down payment. Yes, Steve is right. I've got one subject to. It didn't cost me much. There is a way to market for subject twos. Expired listings, long days on market. Those folks have problems. Or notice of default, those folks have 4 weeks to unload those houses, or they have a foreclosure under. There are ways to find subject to prospects for low dollar in, as well as saving for that next down payment. So I would be a grow your portfolio slow strategist, but sticking to buy and hold.
100,000, but you also want cash flow. You probably wouldn't do the rentals just long term. How could you do both? Maybe flip a certain amount and then also do buy and holds along the way. How would you?
Yeah, right. So we'll just go in reverse since I got the microphone. So I talk to every new person that joins GREIA. And I also teach at all the boot camps. When you're brand new, you've got to learn Chinese and you have to learn Korean. Well, those are 2 bad choices. They're similar. Okay, they have to learn Spanish. You only have enough time to learn 1 new language. Flipping is 1 language, buy and hold is another language. My view, and then we'll see what the others say, is that that's too much for a new person to learn flipping and then buy and hold. I just don't see it happening. I have never seen it happen.
So let me introduce a concept which I used. I basically bought my first primary residence in Roswell. It needed some improvement. I was 5% down, and I finished the basement. It was a great time. Bought in 2002, sold it in 2004. Bought it for $210, sold it for $350. Okay. Now, those opportunities still exist. And let me see a show of hands for those people that own their primary residence. Okay, and how many in here don't own their primary residence? Raise your hand. Okay, so for those of you that don't own a primary residence, I mean, that's 5% down. Now, since the Dodd-Frank Act, you have to be full documentation to buy your primary residence. So you have to show at least 1 year's tax returns or W-2s to qualify, and that's 5% down. Now, also, a quadruplex where you move into 1 unit is owner finance, is a primary residence. So that can potentially be cash flowing with a small income, and that is every new investor's best possible scenario in my recommendation. Now, if anyone saw Heat with Robert De Niro, don't get attached to anything you won't walk away from in 30 seconds when the heat's breathing down your neck. So be willing to sell, move, and buy another primary residence. Great strategy. Least amount down. You're talking about 3.5% FHA, 3% for Fannie Freddie Home Ready programs, 5% for Fannie Freddie's normal programs. Now, again, I'm suffering from a lender's perspective, but I've put a lot of plans into place where I take the perspective of going into a casino, a gambling game. If you have $50,000, I want to see you with $70,000 3 months from now, $100,000. I want to see your cash reserves increasing on a steady, consistent basis. So, investment property. To find something in great condition, you're going to pay for it. Your best deals are going to be something needing renovation, something distressed. Now, Fannie's not going to do that. Freddie's not going to do that. You could do an FHA 203K loan if you move into it, a mini 203K, best possible scenario. But hard money actually works out to be the best scenario when you start tracking cash-on-cash reserves, because cash-on-cash returns and reserves, because hard money is 10% down in most instances plus closing costs, as opposed to 20 or 30% down for conventional. And then whether you can, almost any property, you should be able to refinance out of it into a soft money scenario, because those lenders have gotten ridiculously competitive. Just soft money now is no income docs, they want to know that you filed your tax returns, but they don't care what's on them. You know, they just don't want a tax lien superseding their first mortgage. And it's basically based on the debt service coverage ratio of the rental income. So the rental income needs to be 125% of the PITI payments, and you're in like swimwear. So distressed properties is the key, in my opinion, once you have a sufficient nest egg. And the underwriting guidelines, which falls back on the fundamentals of income, assets, and credit, will not go away. Everything you do is going to be a factor of your income, your asset reserves, and do you have the credit to go conventional or soft money or hard money in the immediate near future. So if I was advising someone with $50,000 on what they should do, first recommendation would be to buy a primary residence. If you just bought a primary residence and you still have the 50, my recommendation would be to find something that's distressed at 50% of the after repair value, where 20% will take it up to fair market condition, and not spend more than half your reserves, because you still have debt servicing. And if you're as bad of a landlord as I was, you'll need those reserves to cover some mortgage payments when you don't rent, because you know your ads are terrible. You're so disagreeable, no one wants you to be their landlord. You know. But I recommend that someone in a $50,000 scenario buys a primary residence and then buys a fix and flip, and then tries to take that up to 100, and then maybe go into a buy and hold, or refi cash out of the flip into a buy and hold, using leveraging in that scenario to take them into the buy and hold, but not depleting their reserves over 6 months below the 50,000.
Another way to say all of this is there isn't one way to do it. Every situation, every individual situation is different, and you have to tailor your approach to your own financial, etc. situation to make it fit within your lifestyle, your financial situation, etc.
All right, I hope we're not confusing you people, but I think you've heard a lot of the same thing. You heard a couple of people say go out and buy $225,000 homes. I think we're all in agreement that flipping is fine. What I don't want you to do is take your entire nest egg of $50,000 and roll the dice on one flip until you know what you're doing. Start off small, okay? And then buying it distressed and rehabbing it will give you the opportunity to refinance or flip, depends how you like it, and try to keep it a year so it's cap gains. And then, you know, as I say, replenish your capital and keep the thing going. But analyzing anyone's financial situation in a 2-minute scenario, saying I got $50,000 and I've got a day job, there are so many other questions. You know, we really do have to look at your whole entire picture, what your goals are, et cetera, et cetera. But you're not hearing anything too different. I mean, I'm not against flipping, but just don't roll the 50,000 on one flip if you don't know what you're doing, that's all.
Who's the question for?
Carla, at what point do you start looking on buying gold? Start looking,
Exit strategy?
exit strategies for buying gold. So whether you've had it for 5, 6, 7 years, what are you looking for?
My typical exit strategy on my rental properties is my existing tenant. And the reason for that is severalfold. Number one, there's no real estate commission. Number two, there's no downtime and the house is not vacant. Number three, I don't have to rehab the house before I sell it. Do I need any more reasons to convince you that?
I guess I'm looking more like,
Yeah.
I mean, what?
Well, again, that's a very personal decision. There isn't a generic answer for that. I don't believe.
I think that's close to a generic answer, and you know, I teach exit strategies in my real estate course, but where I think most people go wrong is they buy a place, they put 10% down, and they think I'm making 4,000 cash flow and I've only got 2,000 in it. I'm making 40% on my money. But if you're buying a distressed property, as we all would recommend, you're a real estate investor, you're buying it under the market, you're doing an intelligent rehab, you're increasing the price, and then you're paying the loan down. It doesn't take long before your equity in that place is significant. And so you have to treat each property as a potential bucket of money and figure out, if I were to sell it and walk away with X amount of cash, what could I do with that cash? And it will show you my return keeping it is relatively low to if I got my cash back out of it, re-leveraged it, stay leveraged, my friends, and went out and bought 2 or 3 or 4 more properties. This is the reason I sold all my properties, is because my return on equity was less than I could make in the stock market. Most people don't even calculate their return on equity. The reason I didn't then use that money and re-leverage it into more properties is because I was mature and lazy, and I was perfectly happy just to transition it, and I know how to handle the stock market. I was perfectly happy to handle it, put it in the stock market, and handle my needs that way, and only be a landlord when necessary. But again, this is all an individual thing, all right?
Buy low and sell high. So almost every neighborhood has a jump up, then it plateaus. You know, you look at Roswell is a great example. I saw a jump up and then a plateau coming. Right in the beginning of the plateau, I sold. I pretty much sold everything as soon as it had a unreasonable appreciation. If the appreciation was beyond or double the average appreciation for the year, maybe if it was a 10 to 20% appreciation over a 2-year period, I was ready to sell. You know, that's it. I know it's going to flatline or possibly decline. When the comps are presented where the property values are up, I sell, and that's it. Until then, I hold on to it.
Yeah, there's a lot to be said for that. You know, 10, 15, 20% a year appreciation is not sustainable. All right? It's what's called reversion to the mean. The long-term average of real estate is only 3%. So you don't want to be the last guy in the musical chair buying at the top of the market. And so again, as your equity's going up because the place is appreciating and your loan is going down and you did a rehab and you've got your down payment in there, don't be afraid to take your equity out and reinvest it perhaps in a different area, the latest upcoming area. Because it's not sustainable. You just put 15% a year appreciation in a calculator and say, man, is that house really going to be worth this much money in 10 years? The answer is going to be no. And I got caught. I got caught with a beach house I paid $700,000 for, and it was worth $1.4 million. And my partner, my wife, and my daughter, we couldn't agree on whether or not to sell. And when we finally put it on the market, we put it on to like 1.2, and the market was 1.1. So we lowered it to 1.1, the market went down to 1. I just sold the house last month, February 9th, for $810,000. All right? So believe me, I have learned firsthand about a hot market, and it's not sustainable, and at some point, think about taking your profit.
My next question is for Steve, and then we're gonna get back.
We have some questions.
Okay, go ahead.
I would be interested just to know what you guys have to say if you don't, I know we have a $50,000 example, but if you have no money or credit, then what would you recommend to get a buy and hold? Would you borrow money or would you?
Get a partner.
Well, for,
The question is, you have no money, you have poor credit, how do you start a real estate career? Great. One step further. Subject to owner financing, sweat equity, partnership, there's no easy answer again, but.
Today in a seller's market, does everyone know what the difference is between a seller's and a buyer's market? What market are we in right now? And that means deals are easy or hard. If you had no money except money for gas, a little bit of money for postage for postcards, if you got the contract on a decent deal, do you think you could find someone to provide the money for that deal? In Georgia GREIA, there's a ton of money on the sidelines because deals are hard to come by. So Jacqueline, if you had no money, you need to become good at finding deals. If you got your name on a contract, you can find money.
And this is, we can speak to this, but this is what hard money lenders do. They loan on the asset, right? So,
For a good deal, you can usually find money somewhere.
so, how do you identify a good buy and hold? Where do you look? Steve, Jordan?
Two things are high on my list. Number one, where can I find a deal? When I buy, my rule of thumb is I never pay more than 80% of after repaired value. So, number one, I gotta find where I can find a deal. Then the deciding factor on whether I can buy that, not whether I can, but whether I would buy that house, is the school system. As a buy and hold guy, I want long-term tenants. Kurt laid it out exactly right. You figure out where the decent high school areas are, you buy in that area, because that's where families want to put their children in school. The only way you get a good high school is if the elementary and the middle schools are good feeding the high school. You can't have lousy elementary and lousy middle schools and have a top-rated high school, because it all comes up from the bottom as the kids grow up and go through the various grades. So those would be my two criteria. Where can I find a deal, and the quality high school area?
Is that the same for multifamily? Good high school or no? Not relevant.
I'm not qualified to answer that.
All right, so adding a nuance for the question is that rule of thumb the same for multifamily? You'd like that to be, but unfortunately, duplexes, triplexes, multi-doors are built in the worst zoning. It's just what cities do. But what multifamily needs to key off is access to transportation. The closer you are to a freeway exit, the closer you are to a MARTA, bus line or train line, the better, because what makes multifamily work is jobs. The blue-collar folks that live in multifamily have a tradition of job loss. So you getting the next month's rent is dependent on how fast they can pick up their next job. If you're in the middle of Timbuktu and there's only one employer that's close by, you're going to have a hard time periodically as those tenants lose their jobs. Job loss is normal. There's a question over there.
Question for Steve. Would the multi work in university areas? In your experience?
Yeah, there's no reason the multi wouldn't work in a university. In a university, you research the university first, find out if it's the kind of university you want to deal with, what their majors are, et cetera, et cetera. Are they growing? What do they have for commuting? students, because those students for the most part aren't going to rent. You want to know if the place is walking distance or if it's on the bus line or if it's neither of the above. So given that it is actually student rental property, most people would say, you know, it's 2 miles from the university, it's student rental property. Not necessarily so, right? You want to be walking distance, you want to be on the bus line, you want to be in an area surrounded by students. If it meets those requirements, there's nothing wrong with buying a quad or a duplex near a university that I can see. Now, I could go out and talk about this for 20 minutes, I'll try not to, but I bought condos, and to me, condos is the same bottom line as buying a multifamily, except for a couple of major differences. Number one, I could diversify and buy in more than one complex. Number two, I could buy them one at a time, sell them one at a time. And number three, having a day job, I could write a very small check every month and take care of exterior maintenance and repairs. But what I was effectively doing when I owned 20 condos here and 18 here and 7 here, and what I was effectively buying multifamilies. But I had more options as an exit strategy, selling to owner occupants and a little bit of diversification and a much simpler life. So I never looked for quads and 2 families around here. Well, the first thing I bought was a 2-family near a university. They built a whole street of these things. I only bought one of them. So yeah, it can happen.
So exactly what he did, downtown was a great opportunity for that when the aquarium went up. You know, giant lofts, and a lot of those lofts went for sale, and there was an awesome appreciation. And from a calculation standpoint, mathematically, 4 condos and a quad look exactly the same on paper when you start running the numbers. And from my perspective, I'll say it again, a good buy and hold is all about the debt service coverage ratio. And let me break it down. If you buy one property every 6 months that has a 2-to-1 debt service coverage ratio, where it's bringing in $2,000 a month in income, and it's got $1,000 going out in PITI, in 5 years, that's $10,000 a month in passive income. Now that ignores a lot of management and maintenance expense, but you're aware of the deficiency. But that is the basic criteria in my industry of what makes a good buy and hold. If it's 1.35 to 1, it's below average. If it's 1.5 to 1, it's average. If it's 1.7 to 1, it's above average. If it's 2 to 1, it's good. If it's 3 to 1, it's phenomenal. Call me if you don't want it. Okay? I'll take all of them all day long. So that's it. You know, if you ask me, I'm just going to ask one question, and that's what's the DSCR? I could care less if it's got schools or dog parks or if it's whatever, you know. But I'm not the best manager of these things. So management, you know, I know my deficiencies, management and maintenance, you know. So your best managers are people who are selling pride of ownership, as we've learned.
One thing that you can't overlook when Rick is talking about management is not something that you have to do yourself. You can hire out management. There are lots of professional managers around. So you can focus on finding the deals and building your wealth. Let someone else do the tenants and toilets.
You had a question?
Yeah, that's fine. This is for Steve, Laurie. Just with your experience with condos and stuff, how do you account for the HOA in your numbers for condos?
Sure. Okay, questions about condo HOAs. Before I do that,
can I give a follow-up question to that?
Yeah,
The
sure.
follow-up question is probably faster. As a homeowner investor within a community, how much influence do you even have on the association when they have like rent restrictions?
You're feeding me softballs here. I mean, come on. All right, I want to back the truck up. My second buy which was my first buy at Akron University, was 2 brick 4-families side by side. So I forgot about that. So I did have multifamilies if you will, depending on how you define a multifamily next to a university. They were not rented to students, and I saw that right away. The guy had the fear of students that most landlords have, and as the tenants turned, I put students in there and I doubled the rents in a very short time period, and then I flipped it. So your question about HOA fees and control, I can answer both of those in one thing. The 3 condo complex I was involved with, nobody wants to be on the board of a condo complex. So I quickly became the president of the POA. And the first thing I did was do a 20-year spreadsheet. Why 20 years? Because I wanted to be sure to go out to the repaving of the parking lot and the re-roofing. And I wanted to make sure that the dues were going to be adequate enough that there would not be an assessment. And in fact, I'm pretty proud of the fact that every condo complex, the dues went down after I took it over. So, give you a specific example. The condos up in Alpharetta, $155 a month dues. 40 of that is insurance on the building. So if you back that off, it's $115. 15 is approximately what it costs for the complex manager. The complex manager collects the dues from everybody and enforces the rules and regulations. Parking space, dogs, picking up after your dogs, someone so's making too much noise. All these tenant issues that if I had a multifamily, I would be immersed in for $15 a month per unit, I am immune to. So now I have $100 a month left. We spend about half of that on an annual basis on the lawn and landscaping, the pool, fence maintenance and repairs, a big issue, whatever, cleaning gutters. The other half goes into a reserve fund. And so when you are buying a condo, you are in effect buying a reserve fund as well, and you should talk to the treasurer or someone on the board and find out if they've done a spreadsheet, find out what their history is of assessments. But in a well-run condo complex, there should be no assessments. I had a friend who bought a condo on the ocean. I felt so sorry for the guy. He didn't talk to me. He got burned real badly. He bought a condo, and the salt air had been getting behind. I forget what kind of siding it had. Maybe stucco, whatever. But the salt air had been getting behind it and just rotted everything out. And he ended up with $50,000 assessment. You should be able to see that stuff coming, right? And when you're going to go buy your first condo and you have your property inspector come to look at your condo, have them walk through the complex and see what he can pick up in terms of returning walls, tennis court, swimming pool, have a quick look at the roofs. But your best bet is to talk to someone on the board, look at the reserve fund, look at the history of assessments. I don't consider it a disadvantage, I consider it an advantage. I could not have owned that many single families, especially while I had a day job. I was pleased to write out a check for, let's call it $100 a month for repairs. Repairs and reserves. Most people don't do the reserves on their single family homes. So you think you're running it real cheap, but own it long enough, guys, you're going to be into roofs and furnaces and driveways and, yep.
Yeah, my question is.
I have a question. I've been patting my hand up for like the last 8 people.
Go ahead.
So you mind if I go? Okay. This is my first meeting, so excuse me for not knowing all the acronyms. You may have already somewhat answered my question. But if you have a rental property and a primary residence and you're interested in getting more rental property, but you have enough cash reserves to pay off your primary residence and still maybe have part, would you ever do that, or would you use your cash reserves to invest?
We agreed on that one? Use your cash reserves to invest, but then they're no longer reserves.
Right.
They leverage, my friends.
Right.
Particularly on your home mortgage, which is 3.5% tax deductible. Go ahead.
Okay. My second question is, you guys mentioned buying in an area where the schools are great. However, is it ever intelligent to buy in an area that's appreciating or maybe gentrifying, so the schools are going to improve, but you're able to get a property at a much less rate than going into a neighborhood where the schools are already great and the property is going to be more expensive?
Well, then you're buying for appreciation instead of for buying whole.
Okay.
So you change the objective, and yeah, that's a great objective.
Thank you. Sorry, sir.
Over here.
My question was around, Steve, earlier you mentioned amortization strategy, and people don't really look at that part of it, as well as return on equity as a metric. Could you talk a little bit more about that and why you think those are important?
Yeah, I want to make one comment on her question. I think it's like the holy grail of investing. Everybody wants to buy a 12 or 14 or 16 cap property in an area that's going to gentrify, and so they're going to get both appreciation and cash flow, and it can happen, but it's not necessarily a game for the amateur to play. It's high risk, high reward is what it is in, in business terms, in finance terms. That area may not gentrify, it may go downhill, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You may find that the 16 cap rate is not going to be 16 cap rate when you get through with the tenant hassles and turnovers and evictions, and so that's my experience. But it can be done, and it has been done, and get a few normal properties under your belt before you go buy something on the west side because you think it's going to double and it's 16 cap rate. It does happen, but I'm reading a book right now by Dave Lindell on how to chase the hot areas all across the country. You think you're trying to chase a hot area in Atlanta. He goes and invests in whatever he thinks is the hot city. Don't try this at home. Get a lot of experience first. What was the question over here? You wanted me to talk more about... Okay, loan amortization is very simple. For those who don't understand the terms, when you make a payment to a loan, a normal loan, some of it goes to interest and some of it goes to reduce the amount of money you owe. It's called principal reduction or loan amortization, right? So your tenant's paying off the loan for you, which is a nice deal, okay? That can be calculated to the penny. Unlike appreciation, which is hoped for by God, long term it's only 3%, or the cash flow that we just talked about, which you could go a whole year, and then all of a sudden have to put on a roof or a furnace, and your whole cash flow for the year just went to zero. So you have to understand that. The thing I like about it is your asset isn't going to fluctuate greatly. Whereas if you buy in stocks, your asset can fluctuate all over the place. God bless you, Jackie. And drive you crazy and unfortunately causes many people to panic and sell when it's down. The real estate is relatively stable even though the cash flow isn't necessarily. The loan amortization, I calculated this for my passive income people recently. It's not true now, but it was true a year ago. I'm getting $52,000 a year of loan amortization just on the dribs and drabs I have left. When I sell, every dime of that comes back to me tax-free. So that's a great way to build your net worth and know what you're going to have in X amount of time. If you get a property, and this can be done today, I think, reasonably easy at today's interest rates. If you get a property that all it does is pay for a 15-year mortgage, never ever shows a cash flow, all right? Just keeps making payments on a 15-year mortgage, and you sell after 15 years, you will make the same amount of money from 5% of your appreciation and paying off the loan. Does that make sense? Your 100 property will go to 170. Your $80,000 loan will go to zero. You will make approximately $80,000 after taxes from the appreciation and $80,000 from the loan amortization. That's a hell of a nice return. No cash flow, mind you, because it just merely made the 15-year loan payment. So one of the things you can do with today's low interest rates, talk to my man Rick, and buy anything you can that'll pay for itself in 15 years.
So what Steve's doing is he's applying his portfolio management in the stock market perspective to real estate by doing what would be called dividend reinvestment in the stock market by foregoing profits and positive cash flow, breaking even in the real estate market, and taking what would have been profits and reinvesting that as a principal deduction to make the big profit in 15 years or even shorter if he sells earlier. And he has he has or had or does still have the comfort of a six-figure income to fall back on to use that strategy, I would assume.
I quit my day job in 2002.
Okay.
Something I forgot to tell you people. I've been retired since 2002.
So,
isn't that contrary to stay leverage?
You go to the head of the class just for asking that question. Here's the deal.
Repeat the question.
The question is, Lobe, you're not making any sense. You're saying stay leverage and you're saying pay off your loan. All right? Get that? So if you go through the math, and I'm a math guy, but if you go through the math of putting 20% down and paying off a loan, even if the thing is paid off in 7 years, you end up making about 18, 19% compound annual growth rate on your money.
But you can deploy that to another house.
Well, okay, my strategy is what I call the dual strategy. You want your 50 or 75 or $100,000 of passive income. At 10 cap rate, you want to get 500 or 750 or $1 million of paid for properties. Do that, focus on that. Now, if you want to flip one once in a while or refinance one once in a while and go out and do flips or buy more property, highly leveraged, fine, do it. But most people will take the cash flow and it will evaporate one way or the other, and they'll have nothing to show. And then there'll be a downturn and they'll have vacancies and they'll lose their property. What happens when you lose a piece of real estate? You lose your down payment, you lose your loan amortization, thank you, and you lose your appreciation. You lose way more than 100% of your investment. That's hard to do in a stock market. So I'm very conservative. So I say get you a core strategy. You know you're going to be financially independent in 6 or 7 years. Then if you get the capital, or if you refi, or if you flip, or you can find subjects to, go out and buy more property and stay as leveraged as you can with that other property. Does that make sense?
I think there's one other piece of the equation, and that is, how old are you?
Yeah.
Well, I'm sorry, it wasn't a question, it was just a comment.
That's about 15 years.
I'm in my 80s, I'm not accumulating. Okay? I'm trying to simplify. I don't want to leave my heirs a bunch of properties that they don't know how to manage. So,
The other caveat there is, can your heirs manage the cash any better if you liquidate and have a big bucket? So at some point, you got to talk to your heirs and educate them financially.
So as I was stating shortly, my goal was to quit my day job as fast as possible. And so staying leveraged, refining my first buys after 2, maybe 3 years. Each of those houses, because they appreciated, yielded enough to be the down payment on another house. And so,
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking.
so
Yeah, but Kurt had about 40 properties to get his income.
well, I overshot my income needs, but each property, like owning things, has a burden. It's a property management burden. I own 30 septic tanks. Right, I own 38 air conditioners. So those things will break, even though the tenants are good because they're in good schools, I've selected them right. It becomes its own burden. But it did allow me to quit my day job in 7 years.
it's not how well the septic tank works, it's how well the field works. Just ask someone who had to replace the field last summer.
All right, so next question. Let's say you find this property, you go into the dynamics of your preferences, and it needs renovation. Walk us through your fix process. Steve Jordan.
Well, the first thing I do is sit down and go through the house from top to bottom and make a list of what I need to do. Second thing I do is I price out those repairs, and then I call my contractors and start scheduling them. And the whole idea is to be able to have as many contractors working simultaneously without them stepping on each other's toes. You know, I mean, the obvious example is you can have the plumber working in the house while someone else is re-roofing the house. They don't get in each other's way. The same thing with the yard work. They're not going to get in the way of the painter, or they would get in the way of the guy who's replacing windows if that's one of the things that has to be done. So you really have to look at the repair list, the items that need to be done, and figure out how many people can I get, how many contractors can I get working simultaneously without them stepping on each other's toes. And the thing that's hardest about that is their schedule. They're not necessarily available when you want them. So it's a big game of scheduling and shuffling in order to reduce the time period to its bare minimum, or as minimum as you can get it. I used to tell my subs, let me back up. I used to be my own general contractor. I didn't hire general contractors. I was the one that hired all the subs. But every sub that was working on my house knew what my hard money cost per day was and how much I was going to charge them if they didn't finish the day they promised me. And by God, that has a real motivational effect on your contractor.
Question?
Yes, sir.
Yes, I was wondering if you buy a house from the courthouse steps and you can't get inside the house, what's your process or formula for figuring out?
Assume there is no inside.
It's a harder.
Assume there is no inside. And base your price on that. However, in over 100 houses I bought, I can't remember a house I wasn't able to get in.
Most people do break into them.
There's always a window open, and if not, there's always a crowbar available.
It's not that funny, but
That's already rented. How do you prioritize repairs that may be needed, like roofs, carpet, painting, whatever?
All right, so the question was, we're stacking up questions here, which is good, that's fine. So the question is, you buy a property that already has a tenant. So that tenant is there, state law is that tenant's lease has to be honored. If it has 6 months left on the lease, that tenant has the right to stay there that 6 months. And they can continue to stay if you choose, if you like the amount of rent. But often you're buying a tenant that's paying way under market rent. So at the end of the lease, you would inform the tenant, I'm not going to renew your lease because I'm going to rehab the house and then re-rent it at a much, much, much higher rent. So you have to keep that tenant till 6 months or whatever their lease runs out. They exit. Now you have a normal rehab situation.
Let's say it's an AHA tenant and you apply for a rent increase and you get the rent increase, so you don't want to kick the tenant out.
Well, now you're between AHA inspects every year. At some point, something is going to start failing inspection. A lot of it is cosmetic. So you will have, all of us landlords have houses that are slowly degrading. Wear and tear, tenants are normal wear and tear. So there will be a point at which AHA will say, well, no, I've never heard of it actually. So you've got a lucky situation then. You will just rent that house for many years and something will happen. They will stop paying and you'll have to evict them. Something will cause a vacancy that will allow you to remodel.
Just because you have a tenant in the house doesn't mean you can't remodel. I have a house that last year, it was a cedar-sided house that the carpenter bees and the woodpeckers had gone to lunch on for many years. The siding was basically unrepairable. I had two choices, either remove the siding and replace it, or put vinyl on it. I talked to my tenant, they were fine, okay. So I had the house vinyl sided, and for 3 days they put up with the noise, but they ended up with a much nicer looking house. And last month I raised the rent on it.
Okay, I don't think it's as much a concern. If it's something that inconveniences the tenant, I got a toilet that's running, I got a faucet that's dripping, the tenant is going to let you go in there, my air conditioner's down, he's going to let you go in there and make repairs. If you're trying to do cosmetic improvements around tenants just because you want to do them, that could be a little tough, yeah.
I'm looking at it from a cash flow perspective. Like, how do you prioritize the major repairs that may be needed? Like, if you need to replace, if the roof is old but not failing, how do you prioritize? Okay, I'll replace it in September, or do I just wait until it starts leaking and then replace it?
In that situation, I would wait until I'm In that situation, I would wait until I'm between tenants.
Yeah, but roofs are only a one day if it's a good crew situation. So always do the roof. It's never it never pays to run a roof out till it's leaking, because that leak will take out ceiling drywall and wet up your insulation. So if it looks bad, replace the roof. And if the AC looks kind of marginal, replace it too, because that's your number one call for a landlord is the AC stop working. All right, so I solved the rehab issue slightly differently. I pride myself on being the laziest investor you'll ever meet, and so I choose, and we're having contests up here, so I choose houses that require a very small amount of rehab. 1970, maybe 75 to at newest, late 80s. I don't buy into the 90s, certainly not later than that, and I have another reason for that. So I'm buying a very narrow range of years, and they often have copper pipe, sometimes CPVC, so I never replace windows. I'm only doing paint and carpet. The plumbing in almost every situation was okay. That age of circuit breaker boxes and electrics, they're good breaker boxes. So if you specialize and target houses of a narrow range, you're not going to have big repairs, rehab budgets. I can get in and out of a house for $10,000, sometimes $15,000 if it includes the AC. I actually like replacing ACs. As I said, ACs are your biggest source of calls. Plus a new AC runs much more efficiently, and tenants love that. I have my rehabs done in 3 weeks. I close the house, I put in $10,000, maybe $15,000 in rehabs in less than 4 weeks. I have a tenant moving in somewhere between 3 week and 4 week. I never pay mortgages. I have a religion against paying mortgages. I want tenants to do that. So I have a very easy rehab situation because I target a house that doesn't need that much work.
What were those years?
1975 to late 80s.
Yeah, the 78 is the lead paint thing, so I would prefer to stay over that. I'm out of the rehab thing because I just do condos. It's so easy, it's ridiculous. That's why I think I'm the laziest.
So, find, fix, fund is the circle. That's the course dynamic that the group teaches. They teach finding properties, fixing properties. Funding properties is the third piece, which we touched on it. So, Kurt, how do you go about funding your properties?
Right, so Rick was talking about our buy and hold boot camp curriculum that we walk everyone through so that at the end you will be able to find, fix, fund your own property. So I had the advantage of having a W-2 job, but I quit my day job and I continued to buy houses with debt. I moved to soft money in that's sometimes called portfolio lenders. GREIA has Michael Braswell, yourself, who's also a portfolio lender for Angelo and Lima One, allow you to finance for 30 years a rental property without having a day job. You need 30% down because they're 70% LTV, so you need the down payment and possibly the rehab. You could prefix that with buying with hard money and then refi with a portfolio loan. But after I quit my day job, I was still able to finance houses with debt using either, it's the same thing, soft money or portfolio loans. It's the same thing. Right? It just doesn't require your DTI, your W-2 job qualification.
So, when you find a distressed property, not too many, the there's not too many resources to get the financing to fix that up, because it can become the bank's nightmare. On an owner-occupied property, there's basically the FHA 203K. On an investment property, there's basically hard money. Now after, and you can think of 3 boxes of different loan types. Prime being interest rates from 3 to 5%, soft money being interest rates from 6 to 10, and hard money from 10.1 to 12. So hard money is typically expensive, but it's easy to manage. It's 10% down, they close fast, won't take any days off the end of your life, and it's got the highest cash on cash return. There's people with fantastic credit that are millionaires that buy multiple properties, and it gives them the flexibility to do many more deals because they do it with hard money, and it keeps some hair on their head as well. Soft money normally won't, the portfolio lender that you refer to, they're also called non-agency lenders because they're not Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, FHA, VA, USDA. They also usually only loan money on stabilized properties, so they can't have much deferred maintenance or need much things. And typically the loan to value is going to be 70 to 80% max on those products. Usually 70% for a cash out refi, 80% for a purchase at most. So going through a scenario where you buy a $200,000 house and it needs a lot of rehab, best case scenario, most hard money lenders are going to let you get in with 10% of the acquisition costs and finance 100% of the rehab. If you have a decent resume and your construction budget's from earth, and sellers paying closing costs, so you can get into those for 10%, fix them up, and then, if you have a $200,000 debt on a $300,000 property, sure, you can refinance that into soft money with no debt-to-income ratio required documents because it's an investment property. So that's an opportunity. FHA 203K is an opportunity. Self-directed IRAs are an opportunity. Partnering with group people is an opportunity. And there's multiple ways to fund deals.
Yeah, I'd like to add one thing. So my wife retired, her equivalent to a 401k rolled out into a self-directed IRA via Advanta. So that cash that she was saving for many years, we then used to buy more rentals, but we were making cash offers, so it was easier for us to get good deals. But it was because she retired. But there's another thing that happens. What if you're laid off? Well, that 401k you had at that employer who laid you off, you can roll that to a self-directed IRA. Advanta is who I chose. There's other choices, but I chose Advanta for advantages. You can buy rentals with that money as well. No one talks about strategic job change. It's kind of an odd thing where you would maybe change jobs within industry, but that previous employer's 401k you can now roll out into a self-directed. It's kind of weird, but it is a possibility if you're within an industry and people move around, strategically move, just to loose up that 401k money.
I want to mention one thing. Rick rolled out $200,000, $300,000 house, blah, blah, blah. Think carefully about the rent. How much can people afford to pay rent? What's the difference between what they can afford to pay rent and your mortgage payment? So that you get that, what did you call that ratio?
Debt service coverage.
Debt service coverage. I like to have a minimum of $400 a month over and above my PITI on a house if I still have a mortgage on it. That kind of covers whether I need to replace a hot water heater or a roof or whatever happens. during the course of the year without having to dip into reserves. Reserves is another thing we haven't talked about, and since I brought it up, I'm going to talk about it a little bit. If you have a buy and hold strategy, have cash reserves. You don't know when a heating and air system is going to go belly up on you and cost you $5, $6, $7 grand to replace, or a roof will cost you $8 grand, or hot water heaters, a chump change, that's less than $1,000. But you need to be able to write a check for that. And so I'm very big on having cash reserves. I typically like to have, if I have just a few houses, I'd have about $5,000 per house, up to about the $20,000 total. Once you've got a $20,000 total, I don't care whether you have 5 houses or 10 houses, I think 20,000 is adequate. You can handle multiple dangerous situations within one calendar year and be able to survive and not have to give a house back to the lender, which is the worst thing to do.
Fannie Mae has a criteria on that. It's 6 months reserves per investment property, which is kind of
I think that's overly optimistic.
Yeah. Another good thing about hard money is that it's pretty much non-reporting. So when there used to be a time period where people could give something back and then ding their credit and cause challenges for 7 years, that's kind of off the books. It's private non-reporting mortgage in most cases. I'm going to promote the Buy and Hold Boot Camp for a moment. It's on May 5th and 6th. It's the second boot camp in a series of 3. The first one was the Fast Start. The second one is the Buy and Hold. And the third one is going to be Mastering Passive Income. It's going to go into a lot more in depth on a lot of what you've heard. And I encourage everyone who has any sort of aspiration to acquire a portfolio or a portfolio to manage to consider it. Be a good weekend to spend doing that, and it should be eye-opening and perspective-changing. I'm going to allow any questions that we missed or any closing statements, and we're going to break after that. So to Rose and Crown for a very low-calorie late-night snack and non-alcoholic beverage. But if there are any last-minute comments or questions, please feel free to blurt them out and hang out.
I had one other topic that we haven't touched on at all, which I think is really key. Buy and hold is a people business. You're a landlord, and your tenants are your customers. You need to treat them the way you would want to be treated, especially when there's a maintenance issue. Not all maintenance issues have to be responded to in 24 hours. A tree falls in the backyard or a limb falls, didn't hurt anything. It doesn't make any difference whether you clean it up today, tomorrow, next week, or next month. A window pane gets broken. Gee, that window pane was okay when I rented you the house. Maybe that's your responsibility because I'm not responsible for the broken window. So you got to also train your tenants on what's your responsibility versus what's their responsibility. But again, as I said, managing tenants is a people business, and the most important thing you can do is A, run it like a business, and B, treat them as if they're your customers, because they are.
Questions? I don't have anything more to. Yes, ma'am?
I just have a quick question. There's obviously so much to learn in the boot camp and moving forward, but if I wanted to have somebody look at my specific situation to get started with my 1 to 5 year plan, would that be a financial advisor to go with? Would that be a CPA, like, you know, to get strategy, you know, all that?
I do lunches with folks. Steve, that's part of what he does in more depth because he's educated and certified in such things, and certainly part of his passive income. Of course, he has made millions of dollars by rearranging folks' personal finances. Steve Loby does that.
That's me.
No. So I do lunches with folks to try to jumpstart you into real estate. Maybe you're a bit beyond me, but you know, I do it for free.
Let me add something to that. I would definitely not use a CPA. You're out of their league. Okay?
I could talk about this for half an hour, unfortunately we're out of time, but,
So do you charge Steve to meet with you?
I encourage people to take the passive income course and then I work with them, no charge.
I want to end this on a light note. I have a burning real estate question that I've had for like 40 years that nobody can answer. We've got this esteemed panel up here, we've got you guys up here. I bet you guys have the same question, because what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you a couple of hints, and you're going to tell me what the question is. I can tell you there's very few people who do this niche. I'll tell you, one guy's name is Paul, and it's a very intensive niche, because this guy Paul never had time to get married. What's the question? Come on, guys.
Is it gay?
He never had time for a wife, is the exact phrase used. Paul. Come on, no Billy Joel fans here? Paul is a real estate novelist. What the hell is a real estate novelist? On that.